Well, thank you very much. I don't know if I should say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, because some of us are in the US, in Mexico, and myself in Southeast Asia. So we are all over the world and with very different time zone. And this is our inaugural session for the 2023-2024 MAK'IT Talks. And I'm so happy that we can open this cycle with the Unpacking Open Science, open with open, Unpacking Open Science, Access, Rights, and Equity. You did not come to listen to me, so I will be short, very short, and just some words of introduction. What is an Institute for Advanced Studies? It's a family, the Institute for Advanced Studies, and very essentially, they were designed and conceived to host visiting scientists coming from all over the world, and this is the main definition, is a policy to stimulate the mobility. But there is another definition, which is offering a breathing space for scientists to look one step at what they are doing, at the world, at the connections. And we were lucky enough that the University of Montpellier decided to create an Institute for Advanced Knowledge, and not only studies, so different types of knowledge, in 2019, which is called MAK'IT, and which is focusing on the interconnection between agriculture, food, environment, and health, which is the main focus of the university, but more specifically to look at controversies that bring together those sectors or that come across these sectors. So this is what MAK'IT is about. And right from the beginning, what we wanted is, as we say, not functioning as a bubble, not functioning just hosting scientists, but making sure that their presence could be a driver and a connecting element between the local scientific communities and the worldwide communities, and in the two directions, taking advantage of the presence of scientists in Montpellier, and in the same time opening our doors and walls to both the scientists all over the world, and to bring together the public society and the civil society in those discussions, which is very much aligned with the topic of today about open science. So for the ones who join us for the first time, these MAK'IT Talks, these sessions, are somehow aligned with what I just said, the platform for dialogue, for continuous dialogue on topics which are at the heart of our focus area, and particularly which bring together science, policy, and society. And well, we are quite proud to bring together a wide range of perspectives, from international authorities to local experts in Montpellier, and to have and stimulate exciting discussion with their very diverse insights and perspective. Well, we began recently with these talks, and following the positive reception of last year's series, we were eager to keep the momentum and to go with these bi-monthly talks. And today, as I said, we focus on open science, and this is one very interesting and particular topics, which is quite stimulating at the moment, where mistrust in science and is dramatically increasing. But I'm quite sure that our Thaura and our speakers will speak about that much better than what I can do now. So we have the privilege to hosting 4 great experts in this field of open science and relationship between policy, science, and society. And we will not only listen to them, but stimulate this dialogue. And Thaura Ghneim-Herrera, our scientific officer, will introduce all of our guests for the today critical subject. I just would like to extend my gratitude to you, to our guest speakers, for accepting this invitation and participating in this open and exciting dialogue. And it's not only valued for us, but also very vital to the success and enrichment of our discussion. So thank you very much, Ana Maria. Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you very much, Andrea. Thanks, Thaura and Gilles and Brenda for organizing our talk today. Well, to close now, I'm glad that all of you could join, and I'm looking forward to this very exciting perspective. Thank you so much.
So today we are here to discuss about open science, a movement, which is an idea that is reshaping our understanding and practice of scientific research in this information-rich age. And the movement toward open access and open science represent an aspiration to transform the way knowledge is created, how it is shared and used, looking to fostering a more inclusive and collaborative knowledge community. A shared vision of open science we share here at MAK'IT is one where the scientific process is not limited to the accessibility of data. Ideally, it encompasses a broader spectrum: open access to publication and methodologies, the use of open source software, the adoption of open peer review, and the active engagement of diverse public and stakeholder groups. The ultimate goal of open access and open science is to build a transparent and accessible resource environment that fosters collaboration and the reliability and the reproducibility of scientific results. However, the path toward this ideal, and we are all aware of that, this path is fraught with considerable challenges and complexities. Open science, as it stands today, is a landscape of varied interpretation and practices. This diversity, what is welcome and is rich, also gives rise to problems such as the emergence of predatory journals. We threaten the integrity and the equitable access to scientific knowledge and to knowledge in general. So these challenges highlight the disparity between the idea, the aspiration of open science and open access, and its practical implementation. So to help us to navigate this complex landscape today, we are joined by 4 experts. Each of them is a pioneer in the field of open science, and we are honored to welcome them all, and I would like to introduce them very briefly. We have the pleasure to open our seminar today with a keynote by Ana Maria Cetto. Ana Maria is the president of the UNESCO Open Science Global Steering Committee and a professor at the Instituto de Física de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. This is for the diversity of languages. And UNESCO, as you may be aware, has recognized the need for a global understanding of open science, given the fragmentation of the scientific and political environment. So in her keynote address, Ana Maria will challenge us with key discussions and ideas, offering and stimulating exploration of open science in the context of this diverse and evolving landscape. Our dear colleague and last year MAK'IT fellow, Eric Welch, will also be joining us on Zoom. He's already there. Eric is a professor in the School of Public Affairs at Arizona State University, where he also is the director of the Center for Science, Technology, and Environmental Policy Studies, CSTEP. His work falls into a broad concept of open access and open science. He's a researcher, and his research covers topics such as genetic resources policies, organization, adaptation to climate change, the use of digital technology in government, and diversity in science. And very importantly, the focus of Eric goes beyond the sample accessibility of data, touching on various aspects of the scientific process, policy making, and the integration of technology into research. And Laurent, Vice President for Open Science and Research Data at the University of Montpellier, is joining us in the amphitheater. She's our very local expert today, and brings a wealth of experience in the practical implementation of open science, reflecting her central role in the University of Montpellier Open Science Plan, and in addition to her institutional contributions, and is also a professor and a researcher, and her work focuses primarily on responsible data management and improving accessibility to research data and publications. The focus, or her focus, is enriched by her extensive background in computer science, with a specialization in data mining and artificial intelligence, which has been instrumental in advancing the field of open science. Finally, we are honored to welcome a special guest from Paris, Andrea Giraldo Sevilla, who is a key member of the Learning Planning Institute, LPI. She belongs to the Citizen Science team. Andrea there is the research leader for a very interesting project called Pattern Open Research within the Citizen Science team. And I love this part. Andrea is a champion in integrating science, technology, engineering, art, humanities, and mathematics, epistemologically and pedagogical approaches. And she work and like to emphasize always the integration of diverse and not hegemonic epistemologies and learning systems. She has been working all around the world. She has been working at UNESCO, with the UN, with the French Development Agency, and also with local offices of the UN in Europe, Central Asia, Latin America, and Sub-Saharan Africa. So welcome to Montpellier. And I will stop here as they will complement their intervention during their expertise during their contribution. So without further delay, I would like to invite Ana Maria to share her screen and delight us with her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thaura, for this wonderful introduction. I think you really set the framework. I would also like to thank Patrick for what he has described to us about MAK'IT, and it really, well, it sounds very attractive. One would like to go and work there. And I'm very happy to be here in the company of Eric and Andrea. I think it's a wonderful team, and it will be very interesting to listen to you. But well, first it's my turn. I'm sorry that we cannot see the audience. We have no direct contact with the audience. We don't know who is listening to us.
Now, can you see them now?
I can see 4 empty chairs.
We will move everyone to the front. Just start.
Good. Well, they started becoming occupied. Well, I think we shouldn't take more of our time, and then I will try to share my screen. Let's see if it works. Yes. Okay.
It's fine.
Do you see?
Yes.
Fine. Okay. Thank you. So thank you very much to MAK'IT for this invitation. And well, you see the title I've selected for this talk, and because I see that transition is an important concept for your institute. So yes, what we are looking at is how to transit to open science. Ideally, to have an open knowledge community, as Thaura just said. So are we on the same page? I think if the answer were yes, we would not be here. And the reason that I put this question is precisely because we have still to go a long way for this. So in your mission, you say something about accelerating transitions to achieve the sustainable development goals. And in this regard, well, the frequency of the keyword ecosystem nowadays, for instance, in the titles or in the abstracts of the top strategy journals, has increased 7-fold over the last 5 years. Everybody speaks now of an open science ecosystem. Well, the word ecosystem is more and more frequently used also in other contexts, but I am here referring to the open science, so-called ecosystem. So I took the word transitions from the name of the mission of the Institute and undertook the exercise of critically approaching this subject of the transition to the open science from an ecosystem perspective. And this is more or less the structure of my talk. Why an open science ecosystem? Well, to the features that characterize natural ecosystems, which are here, because that's how the term ecosystem started to appear in the literature, because of the natural ecosystems. So there was a basic definition: a community or group of living organisms that interact in a specific environment. And ideally, they are balanced systems, and they can evolve slowly, but can also transform very quickly. It depends on the internal dynamics and on the external environment. In extreme cases, they can even disappear. And one important feature of natural ecosystems is they have no finality or purpose of their own. But then there are also artificial ecosystems. Artificial ecosystems are those ecosystems that are human-made, where biotic and abiotic components are made to interact for survival. And they have a purpose, They are made for a purpose, for a human purpose. And normally they are not self-sustaining. They can perish without human help in opposition to the natural ecosystems. They have very limited genetic diversity. It's important because the natural ecosystems do have a diversity. That's one of the strengths of them. And they have a low chance of evolution. The nutrient cycles are always incomplete. And we have examples of those, like, for instance, a zoo, or an aquarium, etc. And the need for integrated concepts capable of satisfying natural and social scientists and supporting integrated research motivates a conceptual framework for understanding the roles of humans in ecosystems, both in artificial ecosystems, but also in those that we have learned to create ourselves, which are the human ecosystems. And the so-called open science ecosystem is a good example of them. There is still very little analysis of human ecosystems, but there is already a bit of literature. We have learned to create artificial ecosystems, no? But then the human ecosystems have we really learned everything that should be learned about them? I think not. These are ecosystems that I created from scratch. And the authors of several studies propose some models, no, based on distributed organizational and information technology platforms, etc. There is, as I said, very little literature. But there are a few things that already are clear. People can bring into being new things that have not existed before. And that's because of the creativity of human beings. No? That's something that characterizes human beings. But if we continue to consider most of the people on Earth as burdens or as customers, we will fail. That's another conclusion that has already been drawn from the little experience with human analysis of human ecosystems. Also, at the center, in platforms as currently designed, there is limited intelligence and sensitivity to the realities of people. They are technologically driven. They are not really driven by the context, by the people themselves. Technology can connect people and augment their abilities, but value creation is accomplished through billions of daily creative acts. So human ecosystems have a reason to be considered on their own. They are important, and they will more and more human ecosystems will appear on the planet of different kinds. So these ecosystems, normally they organize around a focus, a value proposition, or a platform. But the behavior in an ecosystem and ultimately its success is affected by the rules of engagement and the nature of standards and of interfaces. For instance, open versus closed, or imposed versus emergent, etc. Well, remember, this is still on the theory of ecosystems. The approach is an inclusive way to become engaged, to think systemically, to imagine better futures and co-create them. And an important feature of the ecosystem is the modularity, which enables it to allow distinct yet interdependent organizations to coordinate without full hierarchical fiat. The hierarchy is not a must for an ecosystems. On the contrary, but there must be interactions, and those interactions rely on the coexistence of different types of complementarities. That is, every component of an ecosystem must have its own idea of what is its role in the system. And is it complementary to the roles of the others, or is it competing with the roles of the others? Ideally, the roles are complementary. The distinct parts of the ecosystem represent organizations that are separated only by thin crossing points. There shouldn't be so much overlap, but there should certainly be some contact in the way of crossing points. So the behavior in ecosystem and ultimately success, as I said, is affected by the rules of engagement. Now, the member organisms also include suppliers, lead producers, competitors, and other stakeholders. And over time, they co-evolve. They co-evolve. And that leads to an evolution of the system as a whole. They co-evolve their capabilities and their roles and tend to align themselves with the directions set by one or more central organizations. But those companies holding leadership roles may change over time. It doesn't mean that there must be a standard and static leadership or central institution, because the interactions may evolve in such a way that also the leadership can change. So quite different, even conflicting concepts, models, types of open access are operating today. Do we have an ecosystem? It doesn't seem so. For example, in my region in Latin America and Caribbean, open access means free and open access for everybody, from author to end user, with no paywalls, with no APCs. Also, open access tends differ substantially, as we will see in the next slides. So this seems to imply that if we go from open access to open science, we have to first look at whether we are really working as an organic system, as an ecosystem in the open access environment, and what are the main challenges that have not been addressed today so that we don't inherit them in the transit to open science. In the open access environment, we have, as I said, conflicting models. We have already the diamond model as a central, diamond open access model as a central component, but not yet universally accepted. We are far from that. We have, in contrast to that, the gold open access, and we have green open access, and then many others, no? Quite different conflicting concepts. Why do I say that the landscape is fragmented? Because it is difficult to bring all this together in one ecosystem concept. Why? Because there are conflicting trends also. Simply look at this map. Initially, the Open APC register in 2005 had a few components. We had Springer Science with some revenues, another Future Medicine with some revenues, and Optical Society or Optical Society of America with some. And what happened along these years? Well, from 2005 to 2023, the landscape has transited from this originally three components to this very, very rich landscape. Initial open access, open APC register is already part of the history. I remember Martin Blume, the editor-in-chief of American Physical Society, explaining to me already in the 1990s that journal APCs in those times was their main source of income, which was used to support other APS activities. And yes, it has become a source of income, and not just for the scientific societies, but also for the publishers, for the editors and publishers. And this has been, moreover, boosted by the Plan S, no, the APC business model, with some publishers charging over $5,000 per article. So it has become a big business. And it has led to an exponential increase in transformative agreements between universities and corporate publishers around the world, covering an accumulated figure of 900,000 papers today in 2023, as you can see from this graph, which adds to their already huge business. Note that all this capital flow from around the world is concentrated in or transferred to the United States and a few countries in Europe. We must bear in mind that in the last half century, tens of thousands of journals have appeared all around the world, and every year more than 2.5 million articles are published. This is the size of the business. There are hundreds of journals in each discipline, and there is so much new information that it is almost or completely impossible to keep up to date. So, but the potential for business is huge. We don't read all that we publish. We don't read all that we have to buy in order to read, or that we have to pay for in order to be published. This is the situation today. No wonder there is a proliferation of publishers, well-meaning or malicious, who take advantage of this window of opportunity to make a profit, as was mentioned just before in the introduction, no? But not with the same intensity everywhere. And that's interesting. That's where you can see another facet of this fragmented landscape. As you can see in the next in this slide, from this pie chart, the so-called predatory publishers are not equally distributed. You might ask, why is the Latin American figure so low? It is only, well, it's called South America, because that's how other analysts classify us, but actually it's Latin America and the Caribbean, and it accounts only for 0.5% of the total of predatory publishers in figures of some years ago. Unfortunately, the figures have grown everywhere, in Latin America, but also in the rest of the world. And predatory publishing has become also a big business, no? But why is it so low in South America? And here we come to another aspect of the fragmented landscape. Open access has always existed in Latin America because the journals have mostly been maintained by universities and learned societies, and therefore publicly funded. You can see it on the slide. And we see these platforms as part of the mission that we have to make the science and the scientific knowledge and the publications open to everybody and without any charge. The APCs represent an additional cost for us because they have funded the research, all our university, and now we also have to fund the publication of the results, in addition to continuing to pay subscription fees and to maintain our own journals. For example, in 2022, 1 year ago, my university, UNAM, spent over 20.5 million euros on commercial databases and journal subscriptions, plus an unspecified amount on APCs. So in addition to promoting the quality and the visibility of the journals and providing free and open access to them, this well-established ecosystem, because in Latin America we can speak of one, in which the members play their specific complementary roles, promotes shared values and benefits from the community of the members. Here in this slide we can see, speaking of commonalities, an important one is the widespread use of Spanish and Portuguese, which we share with Spain and Portugal. At the same time, we are inclusive and take into account the diversity of other languages, as you can see from the Latindex menu on the right. No? We have even Maya, Nahuatl, and other languages, because we are inclusive. We are mindful of the link between linguistic and cultural diversity and biodiversity, which has been clearly demonstrated in the case of Mexico, for example. This slide is the result of a study made by the Comisión Nacional de Biodiversidad, where they established a close relationship, a correlation between the cultural diversity and the linguistic diversity and the biodiversity in the various parts of Mexico, of the territory of Mexico. Free and open access is not just a principle for us, it is a reality and it works. You can see here from Redalic, this image where the publications produced in Latin America and the Caribbean are read and are consulted everywhere around the world. And they are free and open, no cost for anybody. Nevertheless, and contrary to our tradition, some publishers, predatory or not, are following the mainstream commercial business model and starting to charge APCs, taking advantage of the pressure to publish placed on authors by the performance assessment systems. And given this fragmented landscape, what are the prospects for a transition from open access to open science? What are the guiding principles, the rules of engagement that can guarantee a healthy open science ecosystem? Is the open science community ready and willing to shift gears? Here we say the data appears to be moving away from centralization. It is becoming more diverse and less integrated. That's thereby exacerbating the discovery and usability problem for both human and computational stakeholders. All research objects should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, both for machines and for people. This is the statement made by FAIR, which we don't completely agree with, because we think that the data, that there is a usability problem, is not exacerbated by the fact that we are moving away from centralization. On the contrary, moving away from centralization, if properly carried out, can mean a more extended democratization. So what we think is we have to move to this more democratizing concept of open access and of open science, which means also a radical change in the concept of science itself. And this is where the UNESCO recommendation is a very timely and very helpful tool to guide us in this necessary change, in this necessary transition from the closed concept of science that has prevailed so far to a more open concept, which means not only an introduction of new tools, a development of new tools, but also conceptually a change and in actual practice a change of culture of the scientists, of the scientific environment, and of the institutions that assess the scientific performance. In this regard, the knowledge community, which was mentioned in the introduction, I think ideally it should become the community of everybody. That is, human beings are in essence also knowledge holders, and science has excluded much of the knowledge community by adopting a rather elitist view of science. But we are in very interesting times where we can change, as long as we still continue to uphold some important principles that can bring us together and that can guide us in this transition. And there are the UNESCO principles of quality and integrity, of collective benefit, of equity and fairness, of diversity and inclusiveness. I won't go into the pillars and the benefits of open science because I am sure that you know them as well as I do. What is important is that indeed, if we want open science to become the open science ecosystem to become a real ecosystem that has a long life, we have to consider that each component of this widened ecosystem has a role to play in its operationalization, as well as benefits to gain. We all can benefit from this opening of science. UNESCO itself, with the support of the 5 ad hoc working groups, is helping its member states to implement the recommendation. To the 5 main challenges identified by the working groups, which are here: changing the conventional scientific culture, which I've mentioned, building the necessary human and institutional capacities, having adequate open science infrastructures in place, including, of course, the connectivity, reviewing the criteria for assessing scientific quality, and addressing the negative or unintended consequences of open science. I have added a 6th one, which I think is important in view of what I have mentioned and discussed along this talk, which is moving away from for-profit business models that exacerbate inequities and run counter to UNESCO's open science principles and values. And before ending, I would like to go back to something that was mentioned also in the introduction to this session, which is the mistrust in science. Yes, mistrust in science is an issue today. There are very recent examples of this mistrust, for instance, the resistance to vaccines and during the COVID pandemic and others. But I think I am convinced that the real way to deal with this mistrust in science is precisely to change this concept of science, to open it up, and to establish a truthful dialogue with other knowledge holders, with other communities, and make scientific knowledge as something that is valuable for everybody and which everybody can access to. It's not just open science does not mean simply opening the access to science that has already been produced. It is in opening the concept of science, also opening it up to other knowledge systems and to establishing the bridges, with all due respect, with other knowledge holders and make therefore science more universal. And to the extent that also the educational system and not just the scientific system can help in this endeavor, I think the mistrust in science will become a lesser issue than it is today. So this, I would like to end with this in order to give some time for the discussions, because I understand that we are here for a dialogue and not just to listen to the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ana Maria. And while Eric prepared his screen sharing, I just would like to highlight this idea of the dynamic ecosystem. And I really love this comparison. And in this dynamic, when you know something about ecology, you have all these interactions, competition you already mentioned, parasitism. We can see some examples in your talk. But there is also mutualism and many beneficial interaction between the different components of the ecosystem. I think one of the key points today is to engage people in this conversation, how we can boost the beneficial interaction in this ecosystem, acknowledging that this is dynamic and there will be always some pressure to move to the other directions. But, how we engage as stakeholders, as researchers, as scientists, to promote this kind of beneficial interactions. So we will talk about this later. You are welcome, Eric, to start.
Yes,
and I invite Ant and Andrea, if they are ready, they go to the front to give you a nicer view of your interlocutors today.
Great. Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
It's perfect. Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for inviting me for this today. I'm very excited to talk about what we've been doing. And I would like to sort of start with thanking Ana Maria for very thoughtful and insightful comments that stimulate sort of some of my thinking. And also, it's quite interesting to see how some of these issues of ecosystem and fragmentation are reflected in my study as well. I want to thank Thaura as well, and Patrick certainly, for all of their support. I was at MAK'IT last year as a fellow, and I had a great time. I recommend it for anybody. As very stimulating and very interesting interaction with the community there in Montpellier. I actually really miss Montpellier at this point. Anyway, my talk today is sort of designed to go a little bit into the details of part of open science, which is more on data sourcing, data access, and data sharing. I agree that with Ana Maria that things are very fragmented. The data ecosystem is changing and it's dynamic. And yet, for me, I always have to sort of find out how. I want to know, how is this happening? Why is it happening? And so this study, which is a study, a National Science Foundation study, that is just at the end of its data collection, and we have just started presenting some of the findings. And we presented last week at the American Association for Public Policy and Management. And so I don't have very much time. I have supposedly 10 minutes. I'm going to maybe go over that, but I wanted to give you some thoughts on this. This study is about genomic science and genomic research that's happening globally, and it's very data intensive. Governments are really investing in data infrastructure and encouraging more data use, data access, data sharing. The sort of open data systems, open repositories are really being developed rapidly. And within this, we had a crisis. We had this COVID-19 pandemic that really tested the norms and the practices for data sharing to rapidly advance research. And while the early reports were very interesting and showing that there's record-breaking scientific collaboration and public release of DNA sequences, the macro level approaches really don't look at the micro level kinds of things. And so in this talk, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about micro, but also linking macro to micro. So the questions really are, how do researchers source and share their data? How do crises affect data sourcing and sharing? And what role do institutional logics play on data sharing? So this study is pretty interesting, actually, I have to say, because it conducts 2 global surveys, one in 2020, which is during the peak of the COVID-19, and one in 2021, which is after the peak, right after the vaccines were distributed. And it is a global survey, 86 countries in 2020 and 104 countries in 2021. We surveyed people who, so the unit of analysis is the research paper. So we identified all the COVID research papers within the first 5 months of the crisis, and we surveyed the corresponding authors of those papers to find out use and sharing activities. We did the same thing. Then we developed a sort of a matched sample of scientists who do genomics work in the same areas, but not on COVID. And we did the same thing in 2021. So we have a 2x2 cross comparison approach with COVID, non-COVID, 2020 and 2021, that is global. So the first thing I want to talk about is really the complexities of the access and data sharing. And I could sort of say that complexity is just another word for fragmentation. But when we ask people where they got their data, this is basically a composite of where the different places they got data. So they got data from public repositories, from university repositories, other researchers, some data they already had, data collected for the project and other sources. And notice that the percentages are pretty high. So in other words, people were getting data from multiple sources. Another point here is that we often think about data sharing as sharing from one person to the other person in sort of a dyadic approach, but there's very little of that goes on. So it's mostly to repositories and from repositories. How do they share their data, though? Right? And so we asked a series of questions, and we did not link them in the survey. So we asked them outright about the sharing of the data that they have for the paper that they published. And 37% said they don't share the data. And 58% basically said they did share the data. And a few percent said they didn't know. And then, but if you take a look at the didn't share part, there's a bunch of people who said they didn't share, but then said they posted the data with the preprint. And there's a bunch of people in the didn't share part that that said that the data were already available in a repository. So you end up with about 15.5% who are adamant or very sort of specific about not sharing their data, whereas sort of the data sharing environment is very, very complicated. Some of it is with preprints, some of it's overlapping. I mean, if you think about the overlapping diagram of journal articles that Anna Maria presented, you could do some similar thing with how data are shared. It's very fragmented. What about the role of the crisis on the data sources and on data sharing? Well, when we compare COVID and non-COVID researchers in just the 2020 survey, COVID-19 researchers are more likely to use RNA sequences released by others in open repositories. Non-COVID-19 researchers are more likely to collect their own data. Data sharing, COVID-19 researchers are more likely to share data and share it in multiple ways. And it's particularly true in North America for North American and European researchers, which just sort of indicates that that's where a lot of that work was done and gets to some of these equity issues, structural equity issues. Preprints, so archive postings, that was also on Anna Maria's diagram. COVID-19 researchers are more likely to post preprints in archives. So you do have differences between COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 researchers in genomic research. Then if we look across surveys, 2020 and 2021, and really, we're really at the beginning of the analysis. So I can only offer a couple of things. 2 years after the first outbreak of the pandemic, COVID-19 researchers are less likely to get data from public repositories than during the early stage of the crisis. And this just sort of highlights the central role that data repositories have for ensuring broad access to data during an emergency. But as the society moved further away from the peak of the crisis, researchers are less likely to share their data through archives and instead prefer traditional data sharing options, such as data repositories. So archives also were flooded with research and data postings and sort of very intense engagement of researchers. What's interesting also is that during the COVID crisis, researchers gave less feedback to data sources than than afterwards. So that could indicate that they don't have time to give feedback on the data. It could also indicate that what happened was a much more intensive informal engagement across researchers in which they were communicating in different ways and not formally to the data sources. Okay, so we have a fragmented world. There's a lot going on. We see transitions. The crisis mattered. So how do we think about this in sort of a broader sense and in ways that can help us explain what researcher behavior is, what drives it? So we want to link institutions and individuals, and we take an ecosystem approach to open science. And to be honest, it's a little bit different than the ecosystem perspective of Anna Marie, but this is really a macro, meso, micro approach in which the macro is about the institutions, the culture, the norms, And the micro is really about the researcher behavior. And the meso is in between those networks and organizations that sort of govern and enable open science. So this last little part of my presentation is really trying to link macro to micro. And I take an institutional logics approach. And the institutional logics approach is this idea that institutional logics are the frameworks that orient actors to interpret reality. And so they are the frames of reference that individuals have. They provide meaning and justification for their actions. They provide legitimacy to researchers. And the thing is that there isn't one logic. There's multiple logics. And the multiple logics are embedded in a social context, and individuals experience tensions and conflicts between those different logics. And they choose to prioritize logics, some over others. And researchers are embedded in a very high institutional complexity environment where they have different regulatory regimes, different disciplinary norms, different field cultures, different research teams, and diversity of research teams, et cetera. So we want to know to what extent data sharing practices reproduce macro level institutional logics. To what extent do data sharing practices align with dominant science logics and emerging logics? How does the social context of COVID-19 affect data sharing practices, and how is it linked to institutional logics? So what do I mean by institutional logics? There's an academic logic that we're all familiar with. It emphasizes a search for production and fundamental knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. There's also a commercial logic, which Anna Maria mentioned in the sort of the APC perspective. It values applied research, entrepreneurship, innovation, economic return. As a society impact, that's increasingly important, and it's a challenge-led science, right? And its framing is broader than generating commercial value. It's value for society. There's an equity logic in which science as an enterprise should be accountable to address differences in values, knowledges, power, and capacity. And there's a community logic that's emerging and data intensive, where mutual interdependence requires pooling of resources and global interdisciplinary collaboration. And there's an openness logic, commitment and adherence to sharing and open, publicly accessible repositories, transparency of science production, and reusability of knowledge. And I have to say that these are not isolated. Everybody uses these. Everybody justifies behavior. So what do we find? In the 2020 data sharing in open repositories for the COVID-19 group, when they have a higher society logic and a lower commercial logic, they're more likely to share in open repositories. Data sharing in open repositories for the non-COVID group, people who don't do COVID research, they're more likely to share in open repositories when they have an academic logic, prioritize an academic logic, deprioritize an academic logic, but prioritize a community logic, the omics science logic. And posting data with a preprint for COVID-19 and for the non-COVID-19 are advanced with a priority of openness logic, publishing in an open format. So our current understanding of the dynamics of data access and sharing for science is incomplete. And we really need to be paying a better attention to the social dynamic elements, the dynamic nature of data systems, the influential institutions, and critical events. So what does this mean for us? It means that maybe we should look at stronger policy imperatives. Or maybe we should look at opportunities for greater focus at the meso level, for greater network governance and sharing practices. Or maybe we need to focus at the researcher level and better capacitate them to leverage the dynamic data environment. Anyway, that's my presentation today, and I'm really pleased to be able to give you a barrage of findings, but I think that they generally complement what Anna-Marie was talking about.
Here for this presentation. We are going now to listen more about the situation here in Montpellier. So we will listen about the presentation about the milestones that have been set up here. The Institute that have been announced a few years.
Yeah, quickly to the French way of speaking to me. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here and to share my experiment with open science. And just to say, I'm a researcher in computer science. So, of course, when dealing with open science in computer science, so when dealing with open science, I'm biased because I'm working with data. I'm working as a crossroad between databases and artificial intelligence. My job is to figure out how to store data for leveraging their use. So, of course, we don't store data the same way depending on the use. And what has changed these last years is that at the beginning of databases, when collecting data, it was quite always targeted. I mean, you have a need, you implement the software, and you deal with some data for, for instance, having some information on this and this and this that you need for your final, for instance, thing you want to do. At some point, and because, for instance, thanks to the Internet of Things and sensors, at some point this has changed and it has become the opposite, meaning that it was not because you had something to implement that you went back to data. It was you come with data and then what to do with this data. So I'm working on this. The name is data lakes, and we try to store data. And this is in science. This is very true that we have data, and we try to do something with this data. So this is some point. And what is important is that starting from this, we have to work with how to deal with how to describe this data. How to say that it deals with this and this and these topics, and how to try to do this with a view that is as neutral, without any bias as possible. So all of this, I have said this, only to tell you that open science can also be a research topic, meaning that by doing this, by describing data, by trying to do it possible that several descriptions can be aligned, can be understood, whatever the language you are speaking, whatever the field in science you come from. Should you be a biologist? Should you be a practitioner or a physician? Then it will be okay for you to access and to understand the description of data. And this is one of the pillars of current research in knowledge bases and databases, how to do this possibly. So this is the way we do research. As a vice president of the university, we work on 3 pillars of open science: open publication, open data, and open source, open softwares. And how we implement this is what you said. We have settled 3 years ago the Data Science Institute of Montpellier, Institut de Sciences des Données de Montpellier. And what we do in this institute is we do not any research. We try to help researchers to deal with their data and to exploit them as easily as possible. So this is a kind of pillar of open science, open data, let's say, because what we say is that when dealing with open science, it's like a very small part of everything you have to do for doing research. You see? And by doing this, we try to implement these best practices of dealing with science and dealing with data. So it's all about trainings. It's all about having some infrastructures, data storage, HPC, high performance computing, and cloud infrastructures for dealing with data. So these best practices, if they aim to share data, most of the time, these best practices are for yourself. I'm pretty sure that you have experimented with that. You were working on some data or whatever, and 6 months, 2 years after this, you try to work again with this data, and then no idea where you put this data. So I'm saying this to tell you that all these best practices, all these ideas about open science, the very first goal you can have is yourself, how to deal with your data, your publications, your softwares, your training materials, and everything you are working with. So regarding open science, I would like to highlight three points. First of all, and this is almost what I was just saying, is that open science, from my point of view, is not a goal, it's a mean. It's a mean for doing good research, as it was best practices. Because when facing current challenges, I think, and I claim, that we have now to deal with interdisciplinary, multiple fields, and to cross everything. And for navigating through this knowledge, this material, we have to have everything available, everything discoverable, and everything usable. And the first 2 presentations were all about this. I see science as a kind of iceberg, and open science is a very small part you can see, but everything we have to work on, the science in progress, everything is hidden. If you are not a researcher, you don't know, you are not aware of everything hidden. But we do know that it's not that easy, and it's all done by baby steps. It's all done, how hard it can be, and this is a long-term path. So this process is done by scientists. This is researchers working on research. And one thing currently done in open science is to see it as sometimes as something very, administrative. For applying for grants, you must have this and this and this. This is not all about research and all about science. So we have to turn this the other way, because science is done in research labs. It's not done when you apply to grants. It's not done when you apply for positions and so on. So this is my second point of being careful when speaking about science, of keeping and putting science first. So, for instance, we are currently leading a study with the French Ministry of Research and Innovation about who are the people working with data when dealing with open data, and where are these people working. And we have asked researchers, engineers, librarians, everybody to answer this. And most of the people, they answer, I'm working in a research lab. So this is, this is quite obvious, but this was not the first idea we had, because for us, working on open science is putting together people with very, very different skills and very, very different, backgrounds, which is not easy. We are all speaking, and very often here in MAK'IT, we are often speaking about interdisciplinary research with researchers with many backgrounds. It's not common to speak about having people with different backgrounds, but not only researchers. And open science is not, of course, I've said it's a big, big part of research, but it's also having in mind the regulations, having in mind what is the price of this, having in mind what is the policy of my institution about this, and etc., etc. And it's not all the people working one after the other one. It's the people working together with interdisciplinary. And as I said, it's not only researchers, it's not only engineers, it's not only lawyers. So this is a big, big point in the open science, is how to put this together. So how to put this together, we have to change our culture, and we have to make it possible. We have to make it easy. We have to make it normative. How to say that in your communities, in your field, it will be the way it works. We have to do it rewarding, and it was said previously, what about assessment and research assessment? This is a very, very big point. For instance, the University of Montpellier has not signed yet the Thaura document.
What is Thaura?
Thaura is it's a document putting together some practices about how to assess research in your institution. For instance, not only counting the number of papers you have, not only counting the quality from this and this and this of your papers, but also having a scientific view of what you did. And it's a big, big change and a big, big deal with when you sign this, because it means that all the way, for instance, you run people and you run projects and everything becomes more difficult. So this is the point. So possible, easy, normative, rewarding, and required. And this was also a question raised previously. Should it come from the policy or should it come from the researcher? From my point of view, it's like hybrid. We have to make it easy and possible to do open science, and we have to make it rewarding and required, so that everybody together we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. We are now about to hear about another chapter of the Global Handbook of Open Science. So we have Andrea from the Laurent Institute. Can you tell me about more about the page that you are writing at the moment on this global book?
well, I will talk about it later, but we're basically working on a model in which we are including the motivational factors as the basis of the competency models. I don't know if you've already worked with competency models, but I mean, most of the competency models differentiate between know what and know how. So basically knowledge, which is the theoretical part of it, and how this knowledge is applied, which is the know-how and the skills, what we call skills. It's not the same thing. So we are adding a new category, which is the know why, as a way to assess the motivational factors and the leaking pipeline also in the choice of the different careers by the different sociocultural factors, gender factors, and so on. So this is more or less what we're doing now.
Thank you. No, yeah, well,
okay, wonderful.
It's not working. Can you make it full screen or?
Yeah, I can change it.
Ah, okay, because that is not.
So I can go there and change it. If you want. Okay.
As you wish.
Yeah, sure.
This is a too big room for sorry.
No worries. So I've been listening to these presentations, and I'm actually bringing a bit more of open science in action, more, you know, this link between theory and the practical aspect of it. And basically, there is one word that stayed with me, that is capacity building, and it's more about literacy, about how to bring different stakeholders, citizens, policymakers, and as researchers working together, and identifying this kind of mistrust in science and this kind of gaps that we have in our different worlds and languages. So citizen science, it's an alternative way to bring data and to build this data with citizens. We have different levels of citizen science. This is, we can see just there, like the different development goals. I don't know if you know that there are different targets and different indicators. So this has been a huge work. I added in comments the sources, so you can click on it. This is actually an overview of the citizen science related data and how this is contributing to the SDGs. So in the first column, we have the target 1, target 2, and so on. And we can see that most of the data is related to below water, it's also related to biology, to natural ecosystems, to infrastructures, and we have some data in health. I mean, in health we have a lot of data. It's more or less well related, but we can see where are the gaps in gray. You know, so I invite you to take a look at it. But the most important thing is that we need to, like, methodologies for an engagement tools to bring the public as participants in science as an alternative way and an alternative source and also an alternative researchers to official data, to governmental data that, as we know, it depends a lot on how we construct this data and which different views we have. And also to change this culture, to bring a lot of literacy in our community and with the citizens. The learning paths are very important. So the two projects that I'm going to present are related to education, public policy, and research. So I think that I did it in another tool, but basically it's this kind of different link between theoretical and practical. So indeed we discussed about open science as this approach for the scientific process, for open cooperative work, tools and diffusing knowledge. In practice, I haven't had actually the previous presentation comment of open science as a research topic, which I will add it. Thank you so much for the contribution. But we consider it as a kind of compliance rules, a policy context that actually brings a common framework, a common agenda for action, a common language, and a lever to accelerate also our actions and communicate with other stakeholders. Then we work with responsible research and innovation, which is a new term in this landscape that is basically engaging the public and different stakeholders to respond to the needs of society, which is different than citizen science, that is about engaging citizens. So here we can see the conceptual difference, and then the practical differences is that the responsible research and innovation, we basically enlarge a bit our stakeholders and our beneficiaries. We work with citizens, with policymakers, and with researchers. And there is this question of the societal challenge that is actually one of our, it's how we have conceived the projects. And citizen science, that is community-driven science for the creation of knowledge and capabilities. So at the NPI, we have been working with citizen science for a while. It's quite well known here in France, along with the COISO project at the UHSS, to mention other institutions in France that are working on this. And these are 4 projects that have been coordinated in international and European level. The international level has been Cloud for SDG, and the other 3 have been at European level. So I'm going to talk, you have the link to the projects, you have the link to the outcomes. Cloud for SDG and HIDE projects have already finalized. And there are interesting reports about the different methodologies that they've used to bring the public. Cloud for SDG, they have been using a lot the social networks to bring the public. HIDE project has been this pandemic situation and post-pandemic situation. They finalized their project last year, and there are a lot of actions that they've done with higher education institutions to support community-driven actions in universities. And these 2 new projects that have started recently at our team, which is European Citizen Science, that started last year, and Pattern Open Research, that started this year, and it's the project that I'm going to present you. So in Pattern, we are developing training modules and piloting these training modules in a different transferable skills that we have separated identified in open, responsible research and innovation. So the first one has been open access. We have discussed a lot about it today. The second one is fair data management as well, citizen science, research integrity, gender and non-discrimination, dissemination and exploitation of results, science communication and management and leadership, but not from the economic and commercial perspective, but more about social and emotional skills, managing emotions, stressful situations, and leadership in research. So we are a consortium of 10 partners and 25 different universities, piloting organizations. Our methodology is basically this consolidation of knowledge. So we are, we have done a systematic mapping, and we are analyzing currently the learning resources gaps in order for us to have a basis to build our learning paths, our curriculum, as well as our learning models. And we have carried out for the first semester mutual learning activities. The second part in which we are working at the LPI is developing this training and platform. So that's where we bring these dynamic ecosystems in our model, and interdisciplinarity, as well as this is a mixed method approach, because we are also, apart from network and data science, we are also testing this in the courses, developing this protocol, and gathering the data also with our own students. So in this project, we are developing a competency framework through a technique, which is an instrument, a tool, and a methodology used in medicine to arrive to consensus. Usually competency frameworks, they're done, I don't know if you've followed up, but it's been done through focus groups in close groups of experts at the European Commission, UNESCO, and so on. And then it's basically something that we bring to the ministries of education and to the schools, like, okay, these are the competencies that you have to put into place. You have to transform your way of teaching. And there is no, first of all, sensibilization of the teachers and the professors, and they're not taken into account. So these concepts seem to be something else that they've been doing, but they have, and there is a kind of, how to say, kind of path that can be taken into account for them to actually realize that it is not changing the teaching practice, but it's rather adapting it to the needs of different stakeholders. We're also developing a curriculum, these learning path suggestions with AI, and we are providing a digital ecosystem also, and these learning models. So in order for it to be 100% ethical, the sustainability plan, we're starting like since the beginning of the project, because we would like it to be openly accessible and for free for the community. This will be tested in 2 learning cycles. So the project is just 3 years, but we will continue. And we are currently working on this evidence for policy development, linking institutional policies at the university with national and international policies, and the different activities that are put in place. So when we talk about equity and inclusion in our learning models, we have this framework for open and reproducible research training for academic will of privilege into account. I really invite you to click on it because you have a lot of resources. And we basically have these different categories into account while developing our learning models. So race, health and well-being, childhood and development, living and culture, which is all about language, citizenship, spirituality and culture, also caregiving, and education and career categories. This is also very helpful while you are doing a group activity. You can do the different groups depending, like mixing them and calculating a way to create these groups. And unfortunately, there are not the other slides, but I was, showing a bit more about this framework and this model that we're doing, but we can discuss about it later. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think most presentations cover the idea that we could foster institutional resources or institutional incentives to sustain open science practices. I don't know, I'm sure that in the room there are some questions. And I'm also sure that Thaura has some questions as well for all of the speakers. Do you want to start the connection to ask, I don't know, maybe Professor Cetto or other people? Some questions.
To everyone, and I take inspiration from Eric. I think today we have seen an array of effort at the micro, meso, and macro level of organizing open science, and I think this is very interesting. The main question, or the first question that comes to my mind is when you are fostering all this effort at the different scales, how do you see yourself integrating in the big picture of open science? If there is, this framework, is the FLIRT framework, is the UNESCO framework inspiring you with this activity, or there is also some innovation going, trying to go beyond what is being established as the pathway for open science. And I think so many interesting efforts to foster open science with the students, with researchers, with society, with citizens, doing research on open science, Eric and Anna Maria doing a splendid work of coordinated effort at the international level. So my first question is, how can you see these micro, macro, and meso level efforts integrating to make the open science ecosystem to evolve closely to the idea of utopia of this open access and open science?
Who wants to start?
Eric and Maria, do you want to start? Or we can pass to another question.
Well, if you allow me, I think Eric is the one who should respond to this question. But I would like to say first that I really liked very much the dissection that Eric made of these institutional logics that are operating. And a very quick response to the question, as far as I could understand it, because the sound didn't allow me to understand all the words. A quick response would be that, in fact, precisely this section of the operational logics makes it clear that there is a role for everybody, in order to advance. But certainly the macro level is essential. I do agree with Eric, because as long as there are no clear directives, no clear policies, it will be difficult for the culture, the science culture, the culture of scientists to change, for instance. There are other things that need to change. But the institutional policies are essential. But I think Eric can give us a more concrete response.
I'm not sure about concrete, but I give a response. I think that all three levels are really important. So, certainly at the macro level, that's where some thinking is being done, some consensus building is developing, that, certainly journals are trying to do things right and set things, so the FAIR principles, the CARE principles, sort of all the efforts that global institutions are undertaking, those are really important. I think those help guide many of the institutions that they sort of set in place some prioritization of other institutions. The institutions that I was talking about at the macro level were, these academic institutions and the social impact institutions, the openness institutions. And the idea is that those are competing with each other. And without some sort of direction at the global level, you will not necessarily have the prominence of openness. If that's what society would like, then you won't have the prominence of openness that you would otherwise. At the same time, researchers are relatively rogue. I mean, they're doing things that they're responding to incentives in their own units, and they're publishing in academic journals that give them prominence and make sure that they can advance in their careers. And we saw this in COVID, where there was real tensions between scientists who did not want to share until things were peer reviewed because of fear of presenting something that would hurt people more than it would help people. And then there were others who wanted to share so that there was greater engagement of a broader set of researchers in an open process. And both are correct, right? Both are reasonable. And so these individuals are prioritizing for different contexts and for different rationales. What I didn't talk about is the sort of the meso level. And when I heard Anne and Andrea talking, I thought about more of the meso level. And the meso level are this sort of is not well developed. I mean, it's this meso level is a sort of network of meso level actors that are coordinating the rules, coordinating the governance principles, coordinating, the ways of doing things, coordinating the inclusionary principles for knowledge. And what happens in a global context is you have these sort of broad principles, and then it's very difficult to connect to micro behavior. Universities have their own way, different organizations have their own way. I think that there needs to be greater, and it wasn't in my presentation, but greater emphasis on the meso level as a way in organizing the meso level. It's not sufficient, for example, for the University of Montpellier to be working on its own. It needs to be working connected to universities in Latin America and in Africa and in North America on coordinating what it means to have good governance for data and good governance for making sure that people, researchers, and contexts that have less access or less connected have less ability to participate. That these are not isolated, that they are actually actively in the middle, connecting the sort of the broad policy things, which are really hard to understand at a micro level, for teams, for projects, for researchers. And I don't think that meso level and the network that connects the meso level actors is particularly well developed. And so we, at a global level, we can sort of create these documents, and at a micro level, we can fund projects. But in between, where are the consortia to sort of help govern and ensure sort of openness that addresses all of the different logics?
Thank you, Eric. Sorry. And then we will have Anna after Anna Maria. Please, can you raise your hands?
Go ahead, Andrea.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I couldn't get what you said, but yes, thank you. Thank you for giving me again a chance to say something, because precisely on this last issue that was mentioned by Eric, I think one good example of a serious effort to connect these various levels and bring this top level directives down is what UNESCO is doing to ensure that there is an implementation of the open science recommendation. because they have set up these working groups, and they're making a thorough study and monitoring of what is happening in each and every country, what policies are being put in place, and what's the status of the infrastructure in the various regions, etc. So, and still it is not ideal. Particularly, I see still a problem in establishing the bridges with the academic community, that is somehow isolated and perhaps very often doesn't want to even know about what open science is and what's in there for them. But it is an effort that is worth looking at. I invite you to look at the UNESCO website on what they're doing for the implementation. And also, somebody asked about Thaura. I've put on the chat links to the Thaura, which is a very important initiative that started already long ago at a scientific meeting in San Francisco. And another important document just very recently issued is this reform of scientific publishing by International Science Council. I put also the link on the chat. I think this shows that things are moving, and at least at that level, the scientific community is already being brought on board, let's say, gradually. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne, sorry.
Thank you. Very short remarks. Thank you for. I fully agree with everything which has been said. Just to say that I'm just back from Paris, and we have spent 3 full days, with all representatives of universities working as a vice president or whatever for open science. And we are very lucky in Europe and France, I think, that Europe has a very strong regulation on open science. And as it comes from Europe, then we have to implement it in France. And the ministry is working a lot with us as a network of vice presidents. And it's like, bi-directional discussions. The ministry asking us to implement, and us going back to the ministry, this is difficult, this is easy, this, we need your help in this and this and this. And we have this strong network, and we discuss a lot with the other people. So that's not easy, that's not done, but just to say that networks and meso, this level counts a lot, and that's, I fully agree with you.
So my comment was exactly the same. Social networks are very important, and the different how the different networks relate to each other, which are not just the difference, but focusing on what brings us more or less together. From our side, all the work we do, we try to align it with, even though it's bottom up, we try to align it with the upper dimension language and argot, So there is a question of, from experience and from the work we're doing, we say the same thing with different words, but we are discussing more about the terms that we use and the definition of these concepts, rather than actually working towards different actions that could actually help to our objectives. So here I kind of align this kind of vision of smaller, in which I differentiate the institution from the organization, bringing the institution as an agenda, an agenda that it is not supposed to be specific. It's supposed to be large enough for people to work on kind of the same direction. If we're asking that to the macro level, we're asking the wrong question maybe, because the macro level is not supposed to, even though it's supposed, we will know it's not answering to the local questions. But if we bring things, the organization, even from this institution, at UNESCO, for example, the organization is the way in which teams are working towards that. And this is something that is a cultural thing from the organizations, from the different people that work there. It's a linguistic also a thing, how we communicate to each other. And indeed, I see a huge gap in the meso dimension, which is the intermediates among our different sectors and views. So
Thank you. Do we have a question in the audience? I believe we have some fellows from the MAK'IT program.
Yes. Thank you very much for all presentations and for discussion, and for the opportunity for discuss this subject really important in our development in general. I'm thinking we are talking about organizations and institutions, but I think it has a particular kind of institution very important in the production of knowledge and science. It is companies, and what kind of communication or commitment coming from companies in this context. Very important.
can I add on to that question? Oh, of course.
Hi, my name is Steve Bratman. I'm also a big fellow, and maybe you stole at least the first part of my question. So to add on to it, there used to be a lot of, or there still is a lot of conversation about governmental transparency and the importance of transparency as a function of good governance. So if we were to think about open science as part of good research or good academic practice, I'd like to just add this component of, can you help us think through both the corporation level and the institutions operating within government as I think both sides end up blurring with the research world and having important norm setting examples and important roles to play as we think about how knowledge is produced and disseminated. Thank you.
Who wants to answer to that? And then we have at least two questions on the online audience, and then I see a couple of other questions in the room. Maybe we can start with this.
I just want to check that Ana Maria and Eric are getting the sound well. It's okay? Are you hearing now?
Yes, so.
Question? Answer?
You have an answer here? Okay.
Thank you for raising this question. I like it. Companies are sometimes I use them to tell researchers around me, go and open your science. What a nice example when IBM acquired Red Hat, saying that, can you see, this is a very commercial company, IBM, and they want to Red Hat, which is open source, and they still make money. So you will still make very good science and impactful science if you open papers, data, whatever you do. So I think that companies are not that far away from open science. Some of them are beyond us, meaning regarding the University of Montpellier. Some of them are very close. And as we say in Europe and France, open science is all about open as open as possible, as close as necessary. So we all know this. And regarding this, I must mention that this is an important point. Regarding governance, when I said that Europe has a very strong regulation, in France we have this law back to 2018, is it? Loi pour une république numérique, Republic law, and it's mandatory. It was the case before, but now it's more and more written. So we have this in mind for instance, public bodies, territorial bodies, the city of Montpellier, and so on. They are all more and more aware of this. And we have, when I said that I was in Paris with all the other vice presidents, now every ministry in France has its own representatives for, let's say, data governance and opening things and so on. So, and they all work together at this level. So at every level, we have this in France now. I'm not saying everything is done. I'm saying it's, something we are aware of.
Can I ask a question about the third pillar that you mentioned in your talk? Because so far the question of open source software used in public administration, whether they are related to higher education institutions or other kind of institution, is a big challenge or big. Well, there are many software that could be open. Depending on your discipline here, you may have used air environment or other kind of software. Sorry. How is it? How can you promote better practices in Montpellier?
This is a big point for me because the policy in universities is not that easy to change. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit about this, because we are trying to say that there's no clash between opening and having an impact. In open source, because it's an old history, more than on data and so on, that's real. That's maybe the most difficult part. For some research fields, it's so easy. Everybody will agree that we have to open the sources, the softwares, and so on. So if you were speaking about R, in mathematics, in physics, and so on, it's quite clear for colleagues to open the softwares. If you go to, I don't know, to chemistry, for instance, it will not be as easy as it can be for other topics. So for me, it's like we have to have nice examples and to work at the major level with our institutions to promote this and to be fully aware of what is the law, what are the best practices, what do we want, and it's not that clear. So 2 days ago, it was released this report on open source and open software in France, and even people with very nice skills on this, they were not aware who was owning their softwares. So that's not easy.
Thank you. Before taking a new question, we have 2 reactions, one from Eric, but before.
Okay, so when working with companies, it's a huge relationship of power. Okay. So I would like to add to what you said, what I'm not taking, where is my limit, and where I should say no and have it kind of clear. And besides that, yes, it depends on what you're offering. It depends on what they need. And yeah, it's a question, but that
we're being very clear to myself and to ourselves, the LPI, what we're not taking is very important, just to keep in our ethics, in our own manifesto. And secondly, with the government, yeah, privacy is power. Unfortunately, to that, apart from saying joining networks of researchers or students, I take the bottom approach that is going through education and teaching privacy literacy, data literacy, media literacy at different levels, because that's the only way, unfortunately. But yeah.
Rick, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to comment on the different sort of sectors and good governance. And you know, I agree with Anna Maria that universities aren't always very cooperative. Universities, my university is talking about open science all the time, but you know, it's hard to find, you know, consistency across the campus in open science at all. In terms of sectors, you know, I don't really see that. You know, companies are terrible in many ways, but so are universities. Universities exploit people like crazy and collect all sorts of data. There's rules in place, and if you think about this in sort of, you know, in sort of a global sense, there's some people who can say no, and some people who don't say no, some people who don't have the power or the backing support to say no. And I think that at the meso level, this is where you put in place good governance, but it's not by just talking to other universities in the United States, in my case. It's by talking to and integrating lots of different perspectives on what would be good governance of data and publication, because not everybody wants to share their data. Native populations, indigenous peoples do not necessarily want to share their data, and levels of transparency vary. And what is okay for data use under what conditions? There's a lot of people who have been abused in the data system, and I think good governance can start at the top, but ensuring that, for example, my university understands what good governance of data and publication and data use and sharing is in Ghana or Benin or Brazil or Peru. I mean, I don't think they ask those questions. And this is where the meso level has to play a role. It has to sort of give representation across these different sectors and countries in ways that are actually actionable. And that means that people have to have the capacity to do that across the globe. And I don't think it's there yet. It's just not there yet. So I would sort of say that on the company side, it's the meso level that provides localities and research to sort of engage and respond to researcher demands for data in ways that are fair to whoever is being engaged. So I think it's a complicated thing that we talk about fragmentation and we talk about, you know, different sectors and, you know, pernicious behavior. It is the meso level that can actually build some capacity there to be more thoughtful and inclusive about open research.
Thank you, Eric. We have a question from the audience.
Thank you for the presenters. I'm Suleiman from Burkina Faso, and my question will be basically to Prof. Anna Maria. And it's about talking about open science. We have there a program called inlightening program, which allowed the academics to have wider access to publications. But actually, it's not enough. It's not enough because the university, the academic, the research institution don't pay for open access to journals. So we are mainly limited to go on this platform in order to look for papers. And it's not enough. I don't know whether UNESCO is part of this initiative, and what UNESCO can do to further allow us to have a wider access to the scientific publication. Thank you.
That's a direct question.
Yes. Thank you. Well, this is a difficult question to answer because, yes, there are conflicts of interest. And we are pushing, I particularly, and many others are pushing for true open access, both to authors and to readers, to publications. No? And the fact is that the publishing industry is not open to changing its business model. It is a very successful business model for them, and this is a real conflict. And it's difficult for UNESCO to do something because who is UNESCO? UNESCO are the member states, and of course there's a set of values and principles that govern everything in UNESCO. But when it comes to approving a decision, the General Conference will either votes in favor or does not vote in favor. And not all member states are on the same line, let's say. Of course, developing countries, we are the ones who have to pay double or triple, no? Because of this business model. And it's very costly, very, very costly for the developing countries. But it's a struggle, and we continue. And some of us, what are doing is pushing for open access as much as possible, open access publications and open access repositories and information systems that provide free and open access for the journals, like the directory of open access journals, like Latindex, my own system that's working in all Ibero-American countries. And this is at the meso level, but as long as the situation doesn't change at the other levels, we will continue with this conflicting situation. And what I try to say, the message I tried to convey with my talk was that if this situation, this fragmented situation, this context is now inherited by the open science system, then it will simply be extended, and it will be more difficult to find a solution that is equitable and that provides access for all. And when I say for all, I would like to use this opportunity to refer to something that Andrea had in one of her slides, because it was a very complicated slide with many circles, and one of them was the language. And citizen science is certainly a very important component of the open science ecosystem. But what we have found in countries where there are other languages, especially spoken by people who do not speak Spanish, in Mexico, for instance, but they have another mother tongue, is that before thinking of citizen science, we have to establish build some bridges with those communities, those populations that use another different language, because those other languages doesn't even share the scientific concepts that we use normally. We take it for granted, but this is very far from the reality. So the language issue is a big issue that has to be taken into account if we really want to be inclusive in this process of opening science. Thank you.
Just to say, Mahama, we got your questions and we will address them because they are very specific for Eric and Anne. So we will send you the answer about these repositories. Well, time is always too short when the discussion is good. So we need to close. And I want to thank first to every one of you for taking the time to be here with us today for this discussion. I think we are getting very important messages. The first one, I think that there is engagement, but still there's many things to do, and there is more dialogue to establish and more connectivity between the different levels, trying to integrate the efforts. Also, there is a prevalent problem of equity. There is this utopia, this idea of open science that really are we reproducing the ancient system and we are bringing on this default to the new one. We penalize some regions more than others. Is open science, and I know the answer is not, because we took inspiration from Ana Maria last index and the initiative in the South American region. But there are other regions, maybe they are penalized by transitioning and migrating to a new system. This is an open question. If the transition phase is so expensive for some of the stakeholders that they won't be able to take the bus to this new system. So there are many open questions. So I think this has been enlightening. It has not been conclusive. It's always the case for the MAK'IT Talk. But I hope that every one of you can take contact with each other and continue with this dialogue. And I see how so many possible interactions. It's fascinating how Eric and Maria kind of found a common term. Language there, and I think we have many more conversations that will take place during the cocktail. So thank you again, everyone, and a big thanks to all our speakers.